The smell of sawdust and old coffee still clings to my hands, a ghost of the life I spent 40 years building. My name is Daniel Peterson, and I'm a retired carpenter. Or at least, I was. Now, I'm a guest in my own daughter's house. It started after my wife, Sarah, passed. The silence in our old home, the one where we'd raised our little girl, Jessica, where we'd celebrated Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday afternoons, it was too much. The walls, once a source of comfort, had become a cage of memories. When Jessica and her husband, Brandon, came to me with their idea, it sounded like a miracle. They'd found the perfect house in Fairview, Ohio, a quiet, leafy suburb where they wanted to raise a family of their own. It was a big place, a two-story with a wraparound porch and a garden Sarah would have loved. But they were short on the down payment. "Dad, it would be perfect," Jessica had said, her eyes sparkling like they did when she was a little girl begging for a new bike. "We'd be one big, happy family. You wouldn't have to rattle around in that big house all alone. You'd have us." Brandon, ever the supportive husband, nodded along, his face a picture of sincere concern. "It makes perfect sense, Daniel. Why should you have to worry about yard work, snow shoveling, all that upkeep?" Their words were a siren song, a promise of a new life filled with the warmth of family. My old home was full of ghosts. This new one would be full of life. So I did it. I sold the house Sarah and I had built together. The $180,000 from the sale was more than enough for their down payment, and more than enough to secure my place in their new life. I still remember the day I handed them the check. It felt like I was passing on a legacy, a lifetime of hard work and love. I was buying a future where I wouldn't be alone. We celebrated with a small family dinner. We talked and laughed about their plans, the renovations they wanted to do, the life they were so excited to build. I felt a sense of purpose again, a warmth I hadn't felt since Sarah left. The guest room, my room, had been painted a soft blue, a color Jessica remembered was Sarah's favorite. They had even hung my collection of antique woodworking tools on the wall. For a few weeks, it was everything I had hoped for. I would wake up to the smell of coffee and the sounds of life. At dinner, they would ask me about my day, about the book I was reading, about stories from Jessica's childhood. I felt useful, wanted, a part of a family again. But that was all an illusion, a beautiful but fragile performance. The stage was set, and the play was about to begin. The prologue of my new life was over, and the real story was about to unfold. I just didn't know at the time that I was no longer a main character, but merely a prop. The blue paint on my walls was still fresh when the first cracks appeared in their perfect facade. It started subtly, a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the Ohio weather. The enthusiastic "Good morning, Dad" from Brandon gradually faded into a quick, perfunctory nod as he rushed past with his briefcase and coffee. It was a small change, easy to rationalize away as a busy professional's preoccupation. But a week later, it became a complete silence. My cheerful morning greetings were met with nothing more than a brisk passage, as if I were a piece of furniture in their hallway. I told myself he was just having a bad week, a tough project at work. But the silence stretched into days, and then into weeks. Soon, our kitchen encounters became an awkward dance. I would be at the counter preparing my simple oatmeal, hoping for a moment of connection. He would be at the coffee maker, and we'd navigate around each other like strangers on a crowded street, avoiding eye contact. Then the family dinners, which Jessica had promised would be a nightly ritual, began to disappear. First, it was once a week, then every other night, and finally, every night. "We ate earlier, Dad," Jessica would explain with a strained smile, a practiced line delivered with the same politeness one might offer a guest overstaying their welcome. "Didn't want to disturb your reading time." But I could hear them in the kitchen as I microwaved my reheated portion, their conversation and laughter flowing freely. It was the sound of a party I hadn't been invited to, a family I was no longer a part of. The sound carried through the thin walls like a taunt, a cruel reminder of the warmth that was just out of my reach. The coldness intensified in the following months. Doors would close when I approached, hushed conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room. My name, once spoken with affection, now floated through the house in whispered tones, always cut short when they noticed me. One evening I overheard Brandon say "too expensive to keep." the words stopping as he spotted me in the hallway. "Hey, Daniel, how's the book coming along?" he said, his smile too bright and too forced to be real. The complaints began subtly at first. "Dad, could you keep the television volume down?" Jessica asked one evening, her tone suggesting I had been blasting it at concert levels instead of the barely audible whisper I preferred. Then came the house rules, announced by Brandon one evening in March. "Maybe we need some house rules," he suggested, his voice carrying the authority of a landlord addressing a problem tenant. House rules. I thought to myself, in the house that my money helped to buy, my world began to shrink day by day. My favorite chair was buried under their belongings. The kitchen cabinets were reorganized without discussion, and my coffee and cereal were moved to the highest shelf, where my old arthritic hands struggled to reach. My bedroom, the soft blue room they had so lovingly prepared, had become my refuge, then my prison. I found myself spending entire days within these four walls, emerging only for meals and bathroom breaks. I walked on eggshells, second-guessing every movement, every word. I made myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, hoping to recapture their approval, but harmony never came. Instead, I had simply made myself invisible, while remaining utterly, painfully present. I had adapted to each new rule, each new form of passive aggression, convinced that compliance would restore the loving family I had sacrificed everything for. But love and exploitation could wear the same face, speak with the same voice, and demand the same sacrifices. The difference lay in gratitude versus entitlement, respect versus dismissal. It had taken 6 months for my daughter's dream house to become my nightmare, and I was about to find out just how low they were willing to go. The cold silence that had settled over the house was finally broken by a threat, a cruel and heartless ultimatum from my own daughter. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in my room, trying to read. The guest room, once a loving gesture, now felt like a gilded cage. Jessica's voice, sharp and devoid of any warmth, cut through the quiet. "Dad, you remember the mortgage is due Monday, right?" she said, standing in my doorway, her shadow stretching long and dark across the floor. My reading glasses slid down my nose as I looked up from my book, Chapter 7 of a Civil War history, When Families Divide. The irony wasn't lost on me. If not, I know a great nursing home. The words were like a physical blow, a slap in the face. It wasn't a question. It was a demand, a chilling reminder of my expendability. I had always paid the mortgage on time, using my pension and dwindling savings to cover the $2,800 a month I was expected to contribute. I gripped the bedsheet until my knuckles went white. "That's cruel, Jessica. I've never been late." Her hand waved dismissively, cutting me off. "It's reality, Dad. We have obligations, real ones. Please just make sure Monday happens." She left as quickly as she arrived, leaving a trail of cold air and the echo of her words. The house was silent again, but the quiet was different now, tainted by a new kind of fear. I had given them my home and my savings, sacrificing my comfort for their happiness, and this was my reward. This was the love I had paid for. The conversation haunted me for the rest of the weekend, a bitter taste in my mouth that no amount of coffee could wash away. Then came Sunday afternoon, a day that was supposed to be a peaceful pause before the start of the week. I had gone outside to check the mail, hoping to clear my head, but stopped dead in my tracks. Parked in my driveway, the one I had paid for, was an Audi Q5, blindingly silver, its pristine dealer tag still attached. It was beautiful, sleek, and utterly out of place. My mind, still a retired carpenter's mind, a mind that had built and calculated for 40 years, immediately went to the numbers. I knew a car like that didn't come cheap. I walked around the vehicle, my arthritic knee protesting with every step, the number floating through my head like a cruel joke. $50,000. It was more than my annual pension. It was a sum that represented 18 months of their mortgage payments, money that could have freed me from this financial arrangement entirely. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the car, then back at the house I no longer recognized as my own. As if on cue, Jessica and Brandon came out. Their faces were a mirror of my daughter's childhood, beaming with a sense of entitlement, expecting praise. "Daniel, it's an Audi Q5. Brandon's chest puffed up with pride. $50,000, fully loaded, every option. My electric bill and grocery circulars slipped from my fingers, scattering across the concrete like autumn leaves. As I bent to pick them up, the painful arithmetic continued in my head. My $180,000 down payment, plus 6 months of mortgage contributions, amounted to a total investment of $196,800 in their dream, while I lived on a meager pension and counted pennies. Wouldn't it have been smarter to put that money toward the mortgage? The words escaped me before I could stop them. Jessica's face, once full of pride, twisted into a mask of cold fury. "Dad, don't interfere in our business," she snapped, her voice carrying a sharp edge I'd never heard before. Brandon draped an arm over her shoulder, a physical show of unity against the old man who dared to question their financial choices. "We're adults, Daniel. We can handle our own finances." Their own finances, I thought bitterly, built on the foundation of my life's work. I retreated, a physical gesture that had become a habit in this house. The conversation ended there, killed by the weight of unspoken resentment and my shrinking sense of self. "They deserved nice things," Jessica had said, as she ran her hand along the car's side mirror. "They worked hard. But what about me? I had worked hard my entire life. I had sacrificed, saved, and provided. They had taken my sacrifice and spent it on German engineering and leather seats, while I denied myself basics, walked to the pharmacy because I no longer had a car, and mended a winter coat held together with safety pins. The numbers didn't lie. The Audi gleamed under the streetlights, a symbol of their entitlement and my exploitation. I had been playing the wrong game, a game where love and generosity were met with cold calculation. The realization settled over me like a cold, heavy blanket. The phone rang, a cruel reminder of my isolation, but I let it go. The laughter from upstairs, the sound of a family celebrating their new luxury, punctuated my solitude, a final, unbearable insult. The calendar on my desk had a date circled in red. The 16th of June, Father's Day. For a moment, a foolish, desperate hope blossomed in my chest. Maybe today would be different. Maybe the cruel words, the cold shoulders, the calculated cruelty of the past few months would be replaced by the warmth of family. I dressed more carefully than usual, choosing my best casual shirt, taking extra time with my hair. I wanted to look my best for what I hoped would be a turning point, a return to the love I'd once known. At the top of the stairs, I paused, listening to the sounds from the kitchen. Jessica's voice drifted up, animated and bright, filled with a genuine joy I hadn't heard in months. A phone conversation. "Gary, happy Father's Day." Her enthusiasm hit me like a sunrise after a long night, a stark contrast to the cold, businesslike tone she'd used with me. "Come over tonight for a special dinner. We'll have everything ready, your favorite pot roast and that chocolate cake you love." My heart, against all reason, lifted. My turn would come. My moment for Father's Day recognition from the daughter who had once been my entire world. I descended the stairs, each step deliberate, announcing my presence. I reached the kitchen doorway and waited, positioning myself so she couldn't miss me. The morning light caught her blonde hair as she gestured enthusiastically, even though Gary couldn't see her through the phone. "It's going to be wonderful," she continued. "A real celebration for someone who deserves it." The words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. After months of feeling unwanted, maybe today I'd remember what it felt like to be celebrated instead of tolerated. She hung up the phone with a final, "Love you," and for a moment, I held my breath, waiting for her to turn to me, for her to remember that I, too, was a father. But when she turned, she offered the same perfunctory nod she'd given me every morning for weeks. "Good morning, Dad." No mention of the holiday, no acknowledgement of what this day meant. Just the standard courtesy of a landlord acknowledging a tenant. I stood alone in the kitchen, still holding my empty coffee mug, while she bustled through the house, making preparations for a special dinner, just not for me. My heart, which had just dared to hope, felt as though it had been dropped from a great height. I understood then that in this house there was only room for one father to be celebrated. The genuine warmth, the heartfelt joy, the unreserved love, it was all reserved for someone else entirely. I retreated to my room, the sounds of her preparations, a cruel soundtrack to my solitude. That evening, car doors slammed outside, followed by excited voices cutting through the evening air. Leland, Brandon's father, greeted me with genuine warmth, his handshake firm, his demeanor respectful. "Daniel, how are you? Haven't seen you in too long." His wife Helen admired the house and my Civil War prints. They treated me like family, like someone whose opinions mattered. Watching Jessica transform into a gracious hostess, laughing at her father-in-law's stories and fussing over Helen's comfort, was a surreal and painful experience. She was everything a daughter should be, just not to me. The dinner was a lavish affair, with pot roast and good china. My place setting waited at the table's far end, present but unremarkable. Leland's chair, however, faced the window, positioned like a throne with fresh flowers arranged behind him. The contrast was not subtle, but then again, subtlety had never been Jessica's strength. Throughout the dinner, Leland and Helen made a point of including me in the conversation, asking about my health and my books, treating me with the respect Jessica and Brandon had denied me for months. As we finished the main course, Jessica stood, holding a champagne glass. Her smile was different now, excited, almost theatrical. "Before dessert," she announced, her voice ringing with theatrical generosity, "we have a special surprise." Every eye at the table was on her as she savored the moment. "Happy Father's Day, Gary? Here are the keys to your new car." The Audi keys hit the table with a metallic clink, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. $50,000 in German engineering, presented with the flourish of someone unveiling a masterpiece. Gary and Helen were genuinely shocked, trying to refuse the extravagant gift. But Jessica insisted, her voice overflowing with feigned affection. "Nonsense! You've been like real parents to me. You deserve something special." Then her tone shifted, becoming businesslike, as if she were reminding a subordinate about a task. "Oh, and Dad, the mortgage needs to be paid by Sunday." The words hung in the air between the champagne glasses and the floral arrangements. A $50,000 gift, followed immediately by a reminder that I was still an obligation, a source of funding to be managed. The juxtaposition was so stark, so intentional, it felt like a final, brutal insult. I set down my fork carefully, meeting my daughter's eyes across the festive table. "Don't I deserve even a small gift?" The question came out quieter than I had intended, carrying months of accumulated hurt and the weight of sacrifices she'd never acknowledged. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting for her response. "Number." The word was delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. No explanation, no apology, just the brutal, honest truth. Leland's fork froze. Helen's wineglass trembled. Even Brandon shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that his wife had crossed a line visible to everyone at the table. I smiled then, a careful, controlled expression. It was the smile of a man who had finally received the clarity he'd been seeking for months. "Of course not." I pushed back my chair slowly, each movement deliberate and dignified, and excused myself. As I walked down the hallway toward my room, the celebration behind me gradually resumed, the sound of people who had forgotten I existed. I closed the bedroom door and heard the laughter, the sound of champagne corks, the happy chaos of a family that didn't include me. I sat on my bed's edge, no longer listening to their sounds, but making my own calculations. It was time to recalculate my life. The laughter and clinking of glasses from the dining room followed me down the hall, a cruel symphony of a celebration that had never included me. I closed the bedroom door with a soft click, a sound that felt both final and liberating. I didn't get angry, not anymore. I just felt a profound and heartbreaking clarity. Jessica's no had been the judge's gavel, a final verdict on a relationship I had spent years trying to save. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room, the walls painted Sarah's favorite blue. The room was beautiful, a perfect sanctuary, but it had never been a home. It was a guest room, a temporary shelter bought with my life's work. The framed photo of Sarah on my nightstand looked back at me, her patient smile a silent question. "What took you so long?" My mind, an old carpenter's mind, a mind that had built things for decades, began to work. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about solving a problem, an equation that balanced sacrifice against reward, love against exploitation, The mathematics were simple. I had given everything and received nothing. It was time to recalculate. I spent the next few hours in a quiet, methodical haze. I opened my drawers with surgical precision, folding my clothes the way the army had taught me 40 years ago. 2 suitcases, methodically packed with the essentials I would need to build a new life. There wasn't much. 6 months of living in a guest room doesn't leave you with a lot of personal belongings. From my small filing box, I gathered the documents that mattered. My passport, social security card, bank cards, and the deeds to the house I had sold. These were the things that defined Daniel Peterson, the man who existed independently of their mortgage payments and their grudging generosity. The expensive watch Jessica had given me last Christmas lay on the nightstand. I left it there. I had sensed even then that gifts from her came with invisible strings, a price to be paid in silence and compliance. It was a gift I could no longer afford to accept. Sarah's silver-framed photo was the last thing I packed, wrapping it carefully in a soft cloth. I knew she would understand this decision. She would have made it months ago. The note required careful consideration. Too much explanation would sound like pleading. Too little might seem impulsive. I settled on words that carried the weight of finality without sacrificing dignity. I'm gone. By the time you read this, I am stopping payment on your mortgage and changing my will. I'm tired of being your ATM. Daniel. My signature was formal, final, the mark of a man closing an account, not opening negotiations. I placed it on the kitchen table where they would find it first, weighed down with the salt shaker Jessica had bought to match her perfect table settings. The perfect salt shaker in a perfectly cold home. The taxi app on my smartphone worked efficiently, promising a car in 15 minutes. It was 2:30 the morning, an ungodly hour for a getaway, but it felt like the only time I could escape without drama, without a final confrontation. I carried my suitcases one at a time, minimizing the noise that might wake the family sleeping peacefully upstairs. Each step through the hallway felt lighter than the last, as if I were shedding a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, a sound that, to my ears, sounded like freedom. No dramatic slams, no final arguments, no theatrical exits. Just the quiet departure of a man who had finally learned the difference between being needed and being used. The taxi driver was a young man with a sleepy expression. He didn't ask questions, didn't care about the circumstances that led a man my age to a motel at such a late hour. He just drove. I gave him the address of the Prairie Motel, a cheap, clean place I had passed 100 times. For the first time in months, I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. And for the first time in months, that felt like freedom, not dread. The Prairie Motel was nothing special, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I was in a room I had chosen, with a bed I could stretch out on and a door I could lock. It smelled of industrial cleaner and possibility, a clean slate. I had packed my 2 suitcases with all the essentials of my life, which, I was surprised to realize, didn't take up much room. A man who spends his days making himself smaller, quieter, and less noticeable learns to live with very little. But I did have one thing left that they couldn't take from me, my independence, and I was going to use it. My first order of business on Monday morning was not to listen to the 17 missed calls and 11 voicemails that were already piling up on my phone. Instead, I turned the device off completely, placed it face down in the desk drawer, and set out for downtown Fairview. The legal district, unlike the motel, was buzzing with a purpose that matched my own. My destination was the office of Lisa Anderson, a lawyer I had found in the Yellow Pages. Her office occupied the 15th floor of a building that spoke of competence rather than flash, exactly what I needed for the day's business. Lisa was a woman in her late 40s, with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor and kind eyes that held a hint of a smile. I laid out my story for her, the whole painful narrative, from the promise of family to the cold finality of the word number. She listened without interruption, occasionally taking a note, her pen hovering over her legal pad like a surgeon's scalpel. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of professional calm and genuine sympathy. "Are you certain about this decision, Mr. Peterson?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "My professional duty requires me to ask one final time. This is a big step." "Absolutely," I replied, meeting her gaze without wavering. Jessica made her choice when she chose cruelty over kindness. The celebration was for someone who deserved it, and it was clear to me that that someone wasn't me. It's time I made a choice for myself. The new will we drafted that morning was elegant in its simplicity. My estate, my modest savings, my pension, everything that remained of my life's work would not go to Jessica and Brandon. Instead, the bulk of my estate would go to Sarah's church, with smaller amounts designated for veterans organizations and the local library places that had given me comfort and meaning. Jessica's name appeared nowhere in the 20-page document. It was not an act of revenge, but an act of justice. A final, definitive choice to fund places and people that I felt were worthy of my sacrifice. Lisa explained that Jessica would receive a formal notification of these changes within 30 days. I signed each page of the document with the steady hand of a man who was building something new, rather than just destroying something old. The ink dried quickly, sealing a decision that, in hindsight, I should have made months ago. I had been a willing victim for too long, a source of funding that came with built-in guilt and family obligation. Today, that was over. Walking back to the Prairie Inn, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Anticipation for tomorrow. Not the dread that had accompanied each morning in Jessica's house, but genuine curiosity about what I might choose to do with the hours ahead. The motel room no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It felt like a launching pad. I opened my laptop and began researching housing options in Bellevue, a quiet suburb 20 minutes south of Fairview. Houses with small gardens. Places where neighbors minded their own business while remaining neighborly. The kind of place a man like me could finally call home. The next 7 days were a quiet kind of victory. My phone, turned off and tucked away in a drawer, was a silent monument to the past. I slept soundly for the first time since Sarah's passing, no longer listening for the sound of footsteps in hallways that weren't mine. I ate when I was hungry, read when I wanted to, and began to feel the peaceful rhythms of a life I had almost forgotten. A simple routine emerged. Coffee at 6 o'clock, breakfast at the diner next door, and a morning walk to the small park across from the motel, with a good book. I was finally happy, finally free. But freedom, I was about to learn, comes with its own kind of drama. It was Saturday afternoon, and I was on my usual park bench, absorbed in a biography of Eisenhower, when I felt their presence. The frantic, desperate energy of people whose carefully constructed world had collapsed overnight. I didn't even have to look up. Jessica's Honda sat crooked in a parking space, abandoned rather than parked. Through my peripheral vision, I watched them approach like storm clouds gathering momentum. "Dad, I'm sorry. We were wrong. Please come home." Jessica's voice was a frantic rush of tears and panic, her makeup streaked in ways that suggested this wasn't the first emotional outburst of the day. She moved with the jerky motions of someone running on caffeine and desperation rather than sleep. She tried to take my arm, her fingers grasping like someone drowning, but I gently yet firmly removed her hand. I closed my book slowly, carefully marking my place with the receipt I was using as a bookmark. "This isn't my home anymore, Jessica," I said quietly, my voice steady as granite. Brandon arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train, his usual swagger replaced by something akin to panic. "Old man, you can't do this to us. We have a mortgage," he blurted out, a desperate plea masquerading as a demand. "You have a mortgage?" I corrected, standing up slowly and brushing imaginary dust from my pants. "I have my independence." The truth of my words hit them both like a cold splash of water. For months they had convinced themselves that my financial support was an obligation rather than a gift, a permanent fixture rather than a conditional arrangement. The sudden withdrawal of that funding had shattered their assumptions. Their dream life, built on my sacrifice, was crumbling before their eyes. "We'll change," Jessica's voice cracked with the strain of promises she had no intention of keeping. "We'll treat you better. We'll include you in everything." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw desperation wearing the mask of remorse. Not sorrow for the pain she had caused, but panic about the consequences she now faced. The distinction mattered more than she could ever understand. "I'm buying my own house in Bellevue," I said, watching their faces register this new information. "I'm finally happy." Brandon's anger erupted like a pressure valve releasing steam. "You selfish old fool. What about our investment? What about the plans we made? Plans you made without consulting me? I replied, my voice still steady. Investments you made with my money while treating me like an unwelcome guest. I am not your ATM, and I am not your tenant. I am your father, and you lost the right to my love and generosity the moment you chose entitlement over respect. Their faces, contorted with a mixture of anger, shock, and desperation, were a clear reflection of their true characters. They had tracked me through my credit card records, hired someone to watch the motel until my routine became predictable. The thought of their desperation driving them to surveillance would have amused me if it weren't so pathetic. Please, Dad, we're family, Jessica pleaded, reaching for me again. Family doesn't threaten each other with nursing homes, I said, gently but firmly, removing her hand from my sleeve. Family doesn't spend $50,000 on cars while demanding mortgage payments from pensioners. The words hung in the air between us like a verdict neither of them could appeal. I picked up my book and looked at both of them with something approaching pity. It was over. The charade was over. Don't look for me again, I said quietly, and I walked away, leaving them standing there in the park, surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. I walked back to my motel room, pulled out my phone, and called the real estate agent I'd been working with. I'm ready to make that offer on the house in Bellevue, I told her. The future was waiting, and for the first time in a very long time, it was mine to claim. October brought the kind of crisp, clear morning that made gardening feel less like a chore and more like a form of meditation. 4 months had passed since I walked away, since I had found a small, single-story house in Bellevue with a front porch and a back garden big enough for my needs. It wasn't the grand house in Fairview, but it was mine, and the rhythm of life here had an honest, peaceful quality that had been missing for years. The letter from Lisa Anderson arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with utility bills and grocery circulars like any other piece of ordinary mail. But its contents carried the weight of completed justice, a final reckoning for choices long overdue. The foreclosure proceedings concluded last month, Lisa had written in her precise legal handwriting. Your former residence was sold at auction. I thought you should know. I set the letter on my kitchen table, my own kitchen table, in the house I had chosen and purchased with money I had earned. A profound sense of peace settled over me like a favorite blanket. They had lost everything because they had never learned the difference between earning and taking. 3 missed mortgage payments had been enough. Without my monthly contributions, their combined income, even with their 2 decent jobs, couldn't cover the lifestyle they had built on my sacrifice. The Audi had been repossessed first, then the house that had never felt like a home to me anyway. According to Lisa's sources, they had moved to a small apartment across town, their marriage strained by financial pressures they had never learned to manage without my subsidy. The cruel irony of it all was almost too much to bear. My love had been their security, my generosity, their foundation, and without it, their entire world had collapsed. Gary and Helen, Brandon's parents, had kept the car. It was a gift given in love, not manipulation. But they offered no additional financial support to their son and his wife, to the children who had squandered their grandfather's generosity. Some relationships cost more than they're worth, I reflected, watching a cardinal build its nest in the maple tree I had planted in my backyard. The bird understood something about independence that had taken me 67 years to learn. My garden was flourishing. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit on the vine, and the marigolds bloomed in colors I had chosen because they made me smile. No one criticized the time I spent nurturing growth. No one demanded explanations for my choices. No one treated my presence like an inconvenience requiring tolerance. The phone rang occasionally, telemarketers mostly, sometimes a neighbor inviting me to a block party or a community event. I answered when I wanted to and let it ring when I didn't. These were revolutionary concepts that had taken months to feel natural. Finishing my coffee, I rinsed the cup in my own sink and stepped back into my garden. There was still work to do before winter, and for the first time in years, I was eager to do it. They had lost everything, and I had finally found peace. The lesson was learned. I had not saved them because they did not want to be saved. They wanted an accomplice to their greed, and I had refused to be one. I had chosen to be a man of dignity, a man who respected his own work and his own life. The phone rang late one evening. It was Jessica. Her voice was small and distant, filled with a fragile vulnerability that I hadn't heard in years. Dad, I. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pleas. I listened, my heart a mixture of compassion and stone. I told her I heard her, and that I hoped she was finding a way to learn from her mistakes. But I couldn't be the one to save her, not anymore. I had saved myself. I hung up the phone and walked to the backyard. I looked up at the stars twinkling over Fairview, the same stars that had shone down on my old house, the same stars that had watched me rebuild my life from the ground up. I had survived. I had lost a family, but I had gained my dignity. I had lost a home, but I had built a sanctuary. The victory didn't feel like triumph, but it felt like survival. And sometimes, survival is all the victory you need. The story of how I lost my family but found myself became a quiet local legend. Neighbors would ask about my garden, and sometimes a kind soul would mention my story with a look of quiet respect. It wasn't about the money, it was about the dignity, the courage to stand up for yourself when no one else would. I had been a father, a husband, a builder. Now I was something more. A man who had survived a war within his own home and found peace in the rubble. And that, I realized, was a victory worth celebrating, one quiet morning at a time.